On a bitterly cold Christmas Eve in 1945, in the quiet town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, something unspeakable happened. A fire consumed the Sodder family home. Within hours, it reduced their lives to smoldering rubble and silence. But the horror did not end with the flames. 5 children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, vanished without a trace. No remains, no answers, only questions. For decades, this case would remain one of America's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. What really happened that night? Was it just a tragic accident? Or was it something much darker, hidden in sight? It was just after midnight when the quiet stillness of Christmas Eve was shattered. The clock had just struck 1 a.m. The Sodder home, decorated with simple lights and laughter hours earlier, now simmered in near silence. Jenny Sodder, the matriarch of the family, stirred from her slumber. A strange sound had awakened her. A sharp bang on the roof, followed by a rolling sound, like something heavy had hit and tumbled off. She waited. Silence returned. Perhaps just a branch or debris. She dismissed it. But less than 30 minutes later, the smell of smoke clawed at her throat. She rose from bed, rushed into the hallway, and saw it. Orange light flickering down the stairwell. The house was on fire. Panic overtook her. She screamed for her husband George and began calling the children. Flames had already reached the lower staircase. George burst from their bedroom and helped pull out the younger children sleeping near them, Sylvia, the toddler, and 2 others. But 5 children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were upstairs, trapped. George tried to reach them. He ran for the stairs, but fire and smoke forced him back. He ran outside, barefoot, screaming, desperate, hoping to climb back in through the windows. The truck wouldn't start. The ladder, always propped against the house, was missing. Neighbors gathered. One tried to call the fire department. The line was dead. Time dragged. The flames roared. And then the roof collapsed. In under 45 minutes, the house was gone. The fire, like a living beast, had taken it all. But what it left behind was far more terrifying, because in the smoldering ruins there were no bodies. Dawn broke slowly over the hills of Fayetteville. The snow was quiet now. The sky was gray. Where once there had been a home filled with laughter, all that remained was blackened wood and smoking rubble. The Sodder family, huddled in shock, stood in the frozen yard, staring at the ashes that had taken their children. Firefighters arrived, but not in time. In the small town, the volunteer fire department had struggled to gather. The chief, F.J. Morris wasn't even trained to operate the fire truck. It wasn't until 8 a.m., nearly 7 hours later, that the team began sifting through the remains. And then, something strange happened. They found nothing. No bones, no bodies, no sign of the 5 missing children. It was as if they had never been in the house at all. The fire, they claimed, had burned hot enough to incinerate their remains completely. But George didn't believe it. He had read about house fires, and even at high temperatures, human bones don't simply vanish. He tested it himself, burning animal remains and researching cremation practices. Bones should have been found. And so the questions began to rise, sharp, cold, and unrelenting. Where were the children? And if they didn't die in the fire, what really happened to them that night? In the days that followed the fire, grief clung to the Sodder family like smoke. But grief was soon joined by something else: suspicion. Too many details didn't add up, and the more George and Jenny thought back to the days before the fire, the more disturbing it became. The first sign came weeks earlier. A stranger had appeared at the Sodder home, asking about work. He wandered around the house, lingering near the fuse boxes. He pointed to the wires and said, "These will cause a fire someday." It seemed like an odd thing to say. George had recently upgraded the electrical system. Everything had passed inspection. Why would someone say that? The second sign came just 2 months before the fire. A man tried to sell the Sodders life insurance. When George refused, the man became enraged. "Your house is going to go up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed." George had enemies. He was outspoken, especially about his political views. As an Italian immigrant, he had publicly criticized Benito Mussolini, even in a community with many Italian loyalists. People talked. People watched. The night of the fire, more oddities emerged. Around midnight, just before the flames began, the telephone rang. Jenny answered. A strange woman asked for someone unknown. Behind her, laughter, clinking glasses, a party. She said, "Wrong number," and hung up. Later, after the fire, George found that his ladder was missing from its usual spot by the house. It was discovered 75 feet away, tossed into a ditch. The family's coal truck, which George had used daily, refused to start that night, despite working perfectly the day before. And most chilling of all, a witness came forward. A driver on Route 21 claimed he saw balls of fire being thrown onto the Sodder roof right before the flames erupted. What had really started the fire? Who had sabotaged their escape? The Sodders were no longer sure they had lost their children in a tragic accident. They began to suspect something far worse: kidnapping, and perhaps a conspiracy. The fire was out. The ruins had cooled. The town of Fayetteville had moved on. But the Sodder family could not. Their 5 children had vanished. There were no graves to mourn at, no evidence to bury, and every unanswered question became fuel for a terrifying belief: the children were still alive. It began with whispers, strange sightings, and mysterious letters. A woman in a nearby town claimed she had seen 4 of the children in a passing car the morning after the fire. Another said she had seen the children watching the flames from the back seat of a speeding vehicle. A waitress in a diner over 50 miles away remembered serving breakfast to 5 children with 2 adults. The adults refused to let the children speak. And still more sightings came. A woman in Charleston claimed she had rented a room to the missing Sodder children weeks after the fire. George and Jenny followed every lead. They hired private investigators. They traveled across the state. They even wrote to the FBI, pleading for help. At first, J. Edgar Hoover himself responded, saying the case was local and outside federal jurisdiction, unless the police requested help. But the local authorities refused. They dismissed the case, claimed the fire had destroyed everything. Case closed. But George and Jenny knew better, so they took matters into their own hands. George flattened the property and built a memorial garden where the house once stood. And then they erected a massive billboard along Route 16. 5 faces stared out from the roadside: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, Betty. Beneath them, the words: what was the motive? What was done with the children? Who had reason to hate us enough to destroy our home and children? The sign remained for decades, a defiant cry for answers, a scar on the side of the road. But no answers ever came, only silence. By the 1960s, 2 decades had passed. George Sodder's hair had gone gray. Jenny no longer smiled. The world had changed, but their sorrow hadn't. They still chased every lead, every rumor, every shadow. The billboard still stood, their 5 missing children staring out at passing cars like ghosts frozen in time. And then, in 1968, something arrived. A letter. It came in a plain envelope, postmarked Central City, Kentucky. No return address. Inside was a photograph of a young man, late 20s, dark, deep-set eyes, high cheekbones, and on the back, a chilling message, handwritten in shaky block letters. Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Ill boys. A90132 or 35. George and Jenny stared at the photo for hours. Could it be? Was this their son, Louis, the 9-year-old who had vanished in the fire? The resemblance was uncanny. The eyes were identical, the jawline, even the small scar near the corner of his left eyebrow. They hired a private investigator in Kentucky to track the letter's origin. He left and vanished. The Sodders never heard from him again. Desperate, they added the man's photo to their billboard, side by side with the portraits of their missing children. Now it was not only a plea for answers, it was a warning. Someone out there knew the truth, and someone didn't want it found. The story of the Sodder children had by now grown into something far larger than a family tragedy. It had become a puzzle with too many missing pieces and too many sinister shadows behind the frame. In hushed tones, people began to speak of conspiracies, of kidnapping, of organized crime, of revenge. Some believed the Sodder children had been taken by the mafia connections, perhaps as retaliation against George's vocal political stances. He had openly condemned Mussolini, even among other Italian immigrants who disagreed. In the tight-knit communities of the time, this could have been seen as betrayal, a vendetta. Others believed the children had been kidnapped and sold overseas, raised under different names in distant countries. The idea seemed unbelievable, yet not impossible. Then there were whispers of corruption. Why had the fire department taken so long to respond? Why did the fire chief, F.J. Morris, later claim he found a heart in the ashes, only to bury it secretly in a metal box? When George demanded the box be dug up, it was revealed to be cow liver, untouched by fire. Planted, a cruel attempt to give the family closure. More questions emerged. Why were the local police unwilling to investigate? Why did so many witnesses claim to have seen the children, yet no official follow-up ever occurred? Why did the private investigator who was hired to track the mysterious photo disappear without a trace? It felt like someone didn't want the truth uncovered. And in every dead end, the Sodders felt something watching. A presence. Not just grief, not just fear, but deliberate silence. The case was cold, but it was not dead. Time, it seems, is the greatest thief of all. For George and Jenny Sodder, the years passed slowly and painfully. Their once vibrant home had been reduced to ashes. Their missing children remained only as faces on a billboard. But they never gave up. never stopped asking questions, never stopped searching. George grew old with the weight of that night pressing on his shoulders. He became withdrawn, obsessed. He built a wall of silence around himself and surrounded it with painstaking files, photos, and letters. Every day he passed by the billboard, sometimes repainting it himself to keep the faces clear. He promised, "I will find out what happened to my children before I die." But he never did. George Sodder died in 1969, his heart full of questions that would never be answered. Jenny wore black mourning clothes for the rest of her life. She rarely left the house. Her garden bloomed in the shadow of what once was their home, and every day she watched the road, hoping to see them walk up the driveway. In 1989, Jenny Sodder passed away at the age of 85. Her remaining children took down the billboard shortly afterward. The search had ended, but the mystery did not. Over the years, the story of the Sodder children became legend, passed down in whispers and retellings. A house fire, a vanished family, a photo in the mail. No remains were ever found, no confessions ever made, and no trace of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, or Betty Sodder was ever discovered. Only silence, a silence that still echoes in the dark. Decades have passed since that bitter Christmas Eve in 1945. The ashes of the Sodder house are long gone, buried under time, sorrow, and silence. But in Fayetteville, West Virginia, the echo of that fire still smolders. Some say the truth was buried with George and Jenny. Others believe the children lived, stolen away into another life, another world. But no one really knows. Over the years, strange things have continued to surface. A woman in St. Louis claimed to be Martha Sodder. A man in Texas said he remembered a house full of fire as a child. Psychics, investigators, and amateur sleuths all came and went. None brought answers, only more questions. The Sodder story has become more than a tragedy. It is an American haunting, a real-life ghost story where no ghosts were ever seen. Yet the absence of 5 young souls is felt stronger than any apparition. To this day, the official record says, "The Sodder children died in a house fire." But even now, if you speak to the locals in Fayetteville, they'll shake their heads, they'll lower their voices, and they'll tell you that fire didn't take those children. Something else did. And somewhere in the cold shadows of history, the truth still burns, waiting to be found, or to find us.